Hi, folks. Welcome to our weekly discussions about local history. Thanks for joining me. As always, I appreciate this time to chat with y'all and get some wonderful feedback, which I've been getting, which is great, either on Facebook or YouTube or in the aisle at the grocery store. So it's a really cool way. I was forgot did not know how this would work out when I first started doing it about a year and a half ago, and it's worked out great. Another great outlet to talk about local history. Today's topic comes not from somebody who I was chatting with, but things that I've been reading about. And I came across a Facebook group about the historic roadside markers that are all over the place when you travel around. And I have gotten questions in the past about these, but these couple groups that are on Facebook, um, they take pictures of them and point them out. And there's a lot of controversy about some of them, and a lot of questions that come along with them. And so I thought it'd be neat to talk about it because I do get questions from time to time about historic markers. Uh, Basically, um, the question comes about is, can we believe everything we read on these markers? Of course, when you put things on a metal marker and cast in iron, it gives it this legitimacy that of course it's got to be true. It's cast on iron and they just don't put up signs anywhere, right? Well, there has been some problems with some of the signs that are around about what they contain, the factual information. Some of it's there are a few problems with. Um, Long story short, not all historic signs are created equal. It really depends on who put them up, when they were put up, and the context under which they were put up. So in New York State, believe it or not, I put a link in the comments, and there's a lot of references in there, all in one place from the New York State Museum. Some states have programs, statewide programs, where they put up historic markers. And there's actually a vetting process to make sure that the information that ends up on these signs is accurate. But in New York State, as if you, I invite you to read that link, uh, had a program, and actually in the 1930s had, you'll see a lot of signs around that say New York State Education Department, and they put up these signs. Uh, I noticed several of these signs have information that is not exactly correct, but unfortunately these signs stay up. So even if the information on them has been discounted, the signs don't come down. So what generally happens with these signs is a historical society or a local group uh, will um, will seek that funding to put them up. Now, back then, the New York State Education Department did have a system, supposedly, to vet the information and make sure that the information that was being placed on those signs is accurate. There are some cases where we find that they're not. There was actually one, and I just want to make sure it was actually a New York State sign, but there was one that was making a claim about the history of baseball, and it just simply wasn't true, and people have pointed that out. Yes, state educational department. They put up a sign claiming that this one man had actually invented baseball, and lots of people come out and said, "Well, that's not completely true," but the sign stays up at this man's birthplace. Um, so be very careful when you're reading about signs. The older the sign, there might be some issues with that because they didn't always use historically accurate information. Um, the New York State does not have a program anymore for historic signs. Some states do. We actually have a wonderful foundation, the William G. Pomeroy Foundation, which actually um, they fund these signs. And we have a couple here in the town of Aurora. I actually assisted the Aurora Historical Society and the folks in Griffin's Mills with a couple signs. A great example. So if you see a William G. Pomeroy sign, their vetting process for proving the information that they place on these signs. So what ends up happening is a local historian or local historical society, a local church will apply for those you see them bright yellow and we'll talk a little bit about the variety of signs they have, but bright yellow and blue signs. And they want documentation, and it has to be primary source documentation before they're going to fund your sign. So a local historic society historian will apply for the sign, and they have to prove that that information that they want on the sign is accurate. So, for instance, Alice Hubbard, who was married to Albert Hubbard, the Roycroft founder, and the Aurora Historical Society, several years back, as part of the celebration of women's suffrage, applied for a sign. And one of the claims they were making on the sign, and this sign stands outside the Scheidemantel Albert Hubbard Roycroft Museum, the Scheidemantel House on Oakwood Avenue. And one of the claims that the Historical Society was initially making was that Alice Hubbard attended the suffrage parade in 1916. And not 1916, I am so sorry, she was passed away by 1916. 1914, I believe. I'm going to have to find that out. But she attended this suffrage parade. And th- we had just always thought that that was the case. That that Alice Hubbard was one of the people who went down to Washington D.C. and it was just always 1913, the Great Suffrage Parade of 1913. I knew I was going to get that date wrong, and it was actually the day before the inauguration of Woodrow Wilson. So there's this great suffrage parade. A lot of suffrage supporters, a lot of women and men as well, went down to the day before on March 3rd, 1913, and marched on Washington, basically to complain that a, what better publicity opportunity would you have than the inaugural activities. So we had always thought a lot of Roycrofters had made this claim and it was in a lot of Roycroft material. So we're going to put in the sign that she attended this parade down in Washington, D.C. Well, the Pomeroy Foundation, that wasn't good enough. Just saying that we've always known this information. We had actually come up with a primary source material to claim on this sign that she was going to be, that she was, in fact, at this suffrage parade. So looking through the newspapers and digital newspapers, being able to search the Easter advertisers, we found a two-sentence mention that not only did Mrs. Albert Hubbard and Miss Beulah Hood, who was also a Roycrofter, and she had started with her friends Seaman Hood and Maury, the store that was for years on Main Street, that they both attended this suffrage parade. So the Pomeroy Foundation would only allow that to be on the sign after we proved it with a newspaper account, a contemporary music newspaper account. Couldn't have been 30 years later, someone's recollection, had to be a contemporary account. So they're very detailed, the Pomeroy Foundation, on the information that they'll put on the sign. So that's not always the case, though. So if you see William G. Pomeroy Foundation on one of those signs, you can be sure, pretty sure, in my opinion, that that information is going to be as accurate as possible. They actually have a bunch of themed signs. Actually, one of them is called Local Lore. It's a local lore uh, topic signs they have, and one's local lore, legends and lore. And the information on that is claimed on the sign does not have to be true or proven true. So, for instance, there's a local legend. You don't have to prove that that actual event happened, but you have to prove that it has become so much part of the local legend that it makes its way into the local stories. Like it's been published so many times, an intriguing story. So the event may in fact not have happened. It might be an old ghost story or an old claim, but the fact that it's been told so many times throughout history that it's become part of the local legend, the local lore. So they do have a series of signs like that as well. So go to their website if you want to know more about it. It's really, really interesting. And so that information on the sign might not have been verified as the event happening. However, the legend itself is true. So that it became part of the local legend. So, but throughout the time, in addition to the New York State Education Department, which had its problems, and the with the signage, and the William Pomeroy Foundation, their local historical societies and local businesses have put up signs throughout history, and so you'll see sometimes a sign that was erected by a local historical society that's making a claim. And nobody's really vetted it beyond the historical society. And historical societies are great. However, there are mistakes made along the way. And once the sign gets put up, it doesn't always get taken down. So even in the future, if you find out that there is a mistake on the sign, it doesn't always come down. So one of the other big problems with these historic markers is that it's a hodgepodge of who's putting them up, and so there's a different standard for the information that's placed on them. But assuming that all the information is true on all the signs across our state and other states, roadside historic marker programs, assuming it's all 100% accurate, the problem comes with who selects where the signs go and what is to be talked about on these signs, what's to be commemorated on these historic signs. Some of the issues of the 1930s signs were that there were lots of Native American events that were commemorated on some of these signs. Some battles between the settlers and the Native Americans in the Revolutionary War, and it comes from a European descendant settler perspective, American perspective, and it's not always accurate. And they find out years later that the stories that were told about certain events involving the American Indians who lived on the land and were putting signs up for aren't necessarily true. And that sort of happened, especially with these state education department signs. But so the person's deciding who is, and the organization's deciding which signs go up actually had a reflection on what was considered important. So there would be there would be certain minority communities or Native American communities or poorer areas of this. I'm just using New York State as an example, but poorer areas that didn't have a historical society or someone in their community that was taking initiative to get the grant funding for the signs. So important things could happen, but there's not a sign there. So when you see a sign, it could be an important event that happened there, but that doesn't mean that it's more important than an event that happened somewhere else that doesn't have a sign. So read the signs; they're interesting, but there's not like this threshold, this universal threshold that must be met in order for a place to get a historic sign. So one place could have had there are many examples around our area where we have certain hamlets that have historic signs because we have an active church or an active historical society in them that went and got the sign. But that doesn't make their area much more historic than another area that has one or two signs or no signs at all. So the signs are great, but they don't denote some places more special historically than another place that may not have a sign. And this has been a problem across the country where they found that certain aspects of American history, women's history, um, African American history, Native American history are underrepresented with the signs because they weren't applied for during the periods of time where we had these sign programs. So again, where there's a sign, it might be an interesting historic event, but that doesn't mean that it's more important than a place that doesn't have a historic sign. Some of them I kind of laughed at. There was actually some going back to the idea of who's putting up a sign. One local historic society, as I was going through those Facebook pages where people share pictures of their travels and they see these historic signs, one of them was a stone quarry that they put up a sign, a historic sign, and a lot of them look a lot alike. So some of them look like the Pomeroy Foundation signs. So it's hard to tell the difference sometimes if you're just driving by which organization put it up. But they put up a sign that says a stone quarry was here. Well, lots of towns had stone quarries or brickyards or lumber mills, and they'll put up a sign, and it's important to that town. But from a universal standpoint, it's not. It might be you might have the stone quarry for that particular town, but it's not anything special beyond being that town's stone quarry. It wasn't like the first stone quarry in the state or anything like that. But the historical society in that local town found it important enough to put it up. But that doesn't mean it has the significance beyond that local town. So seeing that the local historical society put that sign up gives you sort of an indication of where it lies. on that spectrum of importance of historic events. And remember, history is subjective in many cases, so what one person finds important, significant to history may not be the same in the eyes of someone else. There was one where there was this racetrack that ran for 3 years, a car racetrack for 3 years, and they put up a sign local. And someone actually mentioned in the comments on the Facebook page is like, what was so important about this racetrack that for 3 years, it just lasted 3 years, that it gets a sign? Well, you know, descendant of the owner of the racetrack might have wanted to see a sign with their family name on it, um, and the local historic society in that town put up a sign. So again, that racetrack wasn't significant maybe beyond the town, or even it might not even have been significant in that town, um, but um, but it got a sign nonetheless. So again, a neat part of history. It's interesting to read. It's interesting to know what might have been there before. But in the large scheme of things, it doesn't maybe rise to the level of historical importance on a statewide or even a regional basis. Just because it has a sign doesn't mean it has that significance. One I found really funny when I was looking by, they talked about a cabin that was located where they had placed the sign of an early family, and they ended the sign by saying their ancestors still live nearby. Well, one of the problems they pointed out later on was this sign still there decades later. Ancestors still don't live nearby anymore. They passed away or they moved away. So the sign becomes inaccurate. So you got to be super careful, very careful about what you place on the sign for longevity. And organizations like the Pomeroy Foundation are really good at that. But apparently, this sign that was there put up decades and decades ago, um, it no longer applies. So you have to be careful when you're reading that. Like, you might think, oh, the family still lives nearby, but they in fact don't. And then there's some issues too of like an, uh, how certain events are claimed. It's like some communities claim events that perhaps the sign would be better located somewhere else. Um, there is one case where there was two signs commemorating a gentleman and where he was born, and they were actually miles apart, and both signs were claiming the same thing, and so people have brought that up too. And these signs are very expensive, so it surprises me sometimes that a little more vetting hadn't been done. Um, but there is actually a sign for one. The Liberty Party was a party that was founded here in New York State, and it was an anti-slavery and abolitionist political party, and actually became a very strong third party. Warsaw, New York, claims that it was where it was founded. It had the first meeting to form the Liberty Party. There are some other areas that also claim that, even around here in Western New York. But there is a sign, a couple signs actually, at places where the Liberty Party had a national convention, and there was one that said that they had the Liberty Party's national convention was held nearby. There's a sign on a street corner, and they have that certain famous people spoke at the convention, including Frederick Douglass. Now, the fact that the convention was held there, that's wonderful, but the sign probably belongs where the party was founded in the scheme of things. Yeah, it's important that the convention was held there a few years, actually more than a decade after the party was allegedly founded. Um, but so sometimes the signs end up, again, in the community. It's important, they talk about it, but in the large scheme of history, if you were to talk about the history of the Liberty Party, you probably, from a broader standpoint, you'd probably be talking about where was it founded, and not necessarily where the conventions were held each year on a local level. That's just my thought. Another sign I found was quite funny is they talked about this one cabin where a president actually slept, stayed over. And I thought that was kind of funny. To the town, it would be important because how many towns can claim that a president stayed over? Now, here in East Aurora, we had Millard Fillmore, and so if we were to put a sign everywhere he slept or everywhere he did business or wherever he shopped, we'd have a sign on every single storefront in East Aurora. Um, but it is important. But think about that. Every president has visited lots of places, and so to that town, it was really important. From the large scheme of things, where a president has visited, Does it need a sign? Does it necessarily rise to the level of a historic sign? So I welcome that debate because I don't necessarily think that every little thing that a president has done deserves a sign. But to that community, it would be quite important and quite interesting. One a great example here in East Aurora of something that happened is in 1939. The Royal Train came through East Aurora. Does that deserve a sign? Well, the Royal Train came through East Aurora, but it also came through Holland, Niagara Falls, Buffalo. All along that train route is the Royal Train came through, which would have the first Queen Elizabeth II's mother and father, King George VI, before World War II. They were traveling from Canada down to Washington, D.C., and the train traveled through East Aurora. Does that warrant a historic marker? Well, it's a neat thing, but where is the best place to put that historic marker? So, not a lot, historic markers don't always end up where they probably should end up, but it all depends on the local community, the person's applying for it, and the organization that actually ends up funding the marker itself. So again, historic markers don't always end up where they belong. They end up in places sometimes maybe they don't aren't necessary, and in many cases the signs are necessary, but they're not necessary. The event that happened there is not more significant than someplace else where perhaps there isn't a marker, because there are so many moving parts when it comes to designating historic markers that it's um, hard to place them fairly everywhere. So uh, take historic markers with a grain of salt. Do a little more research when it's a great way to start your thought process and start your research, but don't necessarily believe everything you read on them. Consider the source. That's basically a good lesson for all of history, not just historic markers, but consider the source, because not all historic roadside markers are made this come from the same source material, and they're not all made the same. So, thanks again for watching. Keep your comments coming. I appreciate the comments. Again, I'm Rob Goller. I am the Town and Village Historian, but these videos and my research are separate, not part of my official duties. And again, as always, these videos, if they work better for you on YouTube, they're available on YouTube on my YouTube channel. Thanks again. We'll see you next time, and thanks for keeping history alive.